has different funding that they can provide, and the state has funding that they can provide a producer, and the USDA has funding. And there's different sources, and the collective conversation that we're having is bringing all those different possibilities together at the same table, so it facilitates that a lot easier than maybe it would be otherwise.
One thing that's a oncoming initiative actually in the next week, there's going to be a Sustainable Cities conference between UND and Grand Forks. And you guys will probably want to get together too, because that one's going to have as its demonstration project, Transforming English Coulee. And you guys have to be part of this. We'll get you guys in too. But
that would be a good project.
yeah, well, I mean, it's a necessary project, and so we're going to be bringing together the departments that have intelligence and perspectives that can work together with city departments, put together the people, the students, the faculty, with the city departments that actually recognize, okay, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do, and then an idea comes, can we do that? Oh, wow, maybe we could. And so we'll be working a lot of these things together with all of you folks. That's just coming this next week.
I appreciate that you brought that up, actually, because that's a way you're going to connect with Emerado too, that I've been involved in projects on UND's campus. So the first year I was here, we did a tree survey on campus, so we understood where all the trees are. I facilitated that, and we work with facilities to do that. Last year we did a vegetation survey on campus. We know what vegetation is where, and we're making recommendations on how to change some of the land management on campus. So, we're thinking about the Grand Forks County, but we're also thinking about urban areas and what kinds of changes could be made to improve the aesthetics as well as the things that the plants do for us in the landscape as far as water infiltration, all those different things. And that's a great thing for communities to have and think about.
Yeah. So maybe next year you guys will be talking about English coolies and aerial reconnaissance of English coolies.
I want to say more about the honeybees. So I know that North Dakota has more of the honeybees anywhere else in the country, and I also know that there's this colony collapse that apparently they haven't solved yet. It's got farmers all over the country, California, and the whole almond industry threatened by it. So what are these honeybees doing on this saline-rich land, and what are the potential research findings there?
Right, that is a great question, and one that I cannot give a definitive answer to, because as in a lot of positions, we really don't know where the hive, well, we know where the hives are at. So what I will say is that, this year, and I made a contact with the researcher with the U.S. Geological Service down in Jamestown. He's specifically looking at honeybee ecosystems, what they're eating, what their nutritional, what they're gaining from the area. And so last year was his first pilot project, and he's really interested in coming up to Grand Forks County and looking at what we're doing. And Grand Forks has, a fairly large, starting to make these contacts with the honeybee owners and working with these projects. And this honeybee pollinator effort is new, just with this first farm bill, and it's a multi-agency effort, so it goes beyond just NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's across USDA and in through other federal agencies. So this is just the first step, but I'm optimistic and kind of enthusiastic that we're going to have some research going on right here, because we do have the native vegetation here. We do have producers who are working with the pollinators, and so we have the opportunity to provide some really great habitat for bees. And so I think we're going to be gathering information and looking forward. Anything else?
One last question, which is for everyone on the panel. I think made it quite obvious what the benefits of local partners are, assuming that these projects really would get off the ground if you did kind of collaborate. What are some of the challenges of working with partners? Particularly, I think we even sometimes private landowners maybe, but even with grasslands, what are the challenges, what are some of the roadblocks you encounter and then have to kind of overcome or work around to kind of make the project happen?
Oftentimes it's occurring in addition to everything else that you have to do. So these guys, the roadblock is I sent them the slides for that last night at 10:30 because I have other duties, and this is kind of on top of that because I'm really passionate about it. I care. These guys care about it, and it's in excess, in extra of what we are normally doing every day. We have to to talk about coming today and do this, but it's meaningful to us, we care about it, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges for me anyway. Time is a big deal. Right now, time matters.
I guess I would say, one of the challenges was just like the initial contact and getting everyone together, so that was really important, but then understanding what tools they had open to them. From the USDA, we're very much tied to the Farm Bill. We have our funding pools, we have deadlines, that sort of thing. So even when we are going to send out postcards, invitations for the meeting, how are we gonna pay for postage? Who can do this? And so, I could print them out in the office, but I didn't have postage available, so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had postage funding available. So it's coordinating, how are we gonna get this done? And other partners who said, we can pay for the water and the, the other things. They actually, the cookies, they actually paid for the postcards that I printed them out on. So it was kind of coordinating where the funding's gonna come from. Scheduling is a challenge. Like Catherine said, it's timing, and are we all gonna meet in Grand Forks? We wanna set up a conference call. So it's just what we call them small issues, but they're really big issues. If you can't talk to one another, can't, get even the first step out, you don't go very far. So it's all been learning, and it's been positive, so.
I'll piggyback on Laurel's statement, the funding, especially mine. I've got federal money, I've got district money, I can fund that, but then they're getting, a lot of their research comes from federal money, so I can't match that, so that, we tweak it as much as possible. And then, what the landowners face too. Every single landowner has their issues, so some have rocks, some have the salinity issues, and that brings a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. Because what can we do in your operation, like Catherine was saying, to tweak it, to make it more profitable for you?
In the UAS world, private and public partnerships are a challenge. And it's because we're separated by a common language. It took us 11 months to get a UAS donation. Northrop Grumman gave us 2 nice unmanned aircraft systems. But when it got to legal, that was the challenge. And the legal department says, hey, we want litigation to be in New York. Well, North Dakota says, no, it's got to be in North Dakota. So it takes a long time to work through that. And we're just separated by a common language. And the same thing with the enhanced use lease. It just takes time. Funding is always an issue. You have to figure out where the pony is in there for everybody, because business is there to make money. And if they can't make money, they're not going to invest. So you got to figure out, okay, well, how are you going to make them more profitable, while at the same time, increasing the activity in North Dakota. So it is a challenge.
And I think, probably a prime one, everybody, I think, is saying the same thing. It's the communication amongst the partners. You need to really be able to understand what each partner is hoping to do, what they're hoping to accomplish, so that you don't step on their toes and mess up kind of what they're doing. And it truly is that idea of bringing everybody to kind of a common vision, but still, everybody does have their own interest and their own idea. And so you need to have constant communication and have a sense of, what everybody's part is in the whole. And that's difficult, all that communication.
We're blessed in North Dakota to have a congressional delegation and a state organization from Lieutenant Governor and the Governor on down that supports what we're trying to do here. And that's important to businesses. You couldn't do that in New York, you can't do it in California, you can probably do it in some other states in the Midwest, but North Dakota is well positioned for that. We had the FAA administrator here last week, but that wouldn't happen without Senator Heitkamp twisting a little arm every now and then. Why else would they come to North Dakota? Once they got here, they understood why they came to North Dakota, but you have to get them here. So it is a team effort. And I think North Dakota does a good job of figuring out how to work together.
Al brings up a good point about, the state and the CODEL. Just to give you an example, once we brought on our developer, one of them is located in Washington DC, others in Austin, Texas. But we took them to Washington DC to introduce them to the 2 senators. When they left the room after visiting with the senators, they walked out and they went, it's kind of hard to believe that you had both your senators in the same room. willing to talk to somebody. And they said, what's even more amazing is they understood what we were talking about. So, so I mean,
One was a Democrat, one's a
yeah,
Republican.
and like I said, they've never kind of had that, and these guys have developed stuff all around the country. We kind of take that for granted, and we really probably shouldn't. Nor should we take for granted the ability to, walk in the Capitol and turn into the governor's office and, be able to talk to folks there and stuff. I'm learning more and more that's very, very unique in this country.
You didn't have coffee with Obama last week when you went down?
Did you? No, you usually can't find them in town.
Any other questions?
Can I clarify one thing too before you go into
I
that?
suppose.
Thank you. When I brought up that the Grand Sky is a benefit to the Air Force Base, the key benefit of that is you all know the conversations about tight federal budgets and cutbacks. The lease payments on Grand Sky, both for the land, and then there's a participation rental rate that would be paid to the Air Force. That money stays at the local Air Force Base. It does not go back to the Department of Defense. So when we talk about trying to help strengthen, and you can well imagine there very few military construction dollars being allowed. So if we think over that 50-year lease, that's a great benefit. So that's where the Air Force Base gets benefit.
I just did one last question. It's just about, it's something that Commander talked about today with this kind of, potentially with another rack coming through. You see there's maybe a way, there seems to be some of the fund, at least construction on a military basis, that's not maybe tax money. Is that maybe a future of how maintaining some of these bases, these kind of civilian, military partnerships?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, and that again, we've kind of learned that and have pursued that. We're hoping to do it with Grand Sky, but also when he talked about the 331 partnerships, what those really involve are finding ways for local entities, and the city's really involved in this more than the county, because we've got our hands full with Grand Sky itself. But it's, are there ways to provide, utility services differently, sponsored by the local entity? Are there, the military, and rightfully so, they want the money to go to the mission, not to the operation of the base so much. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But that's our understanding of it. So even, wild things like, could the City of Grand Forks Park District take over the operation of, say, the golf course? And our military people deserve to have these things to do on the bases. Could Grand Forks Park District take over the operation of, say, the golf course out there? Take over the operation of perhaps the fitness center out there, since they operate those kinds of things. All of those kinds of thoughts have to enter in, and right now, with the leadership of Todd Phelan at the city, the county, the park district, All True Hospital is involved. What kind of services could a local hospital help take off the burden of money, being spent by the military for operations of those? I mean, we have to look at all of that, but that is the intent, is to say, hey, we have a very financially stable Air Force base where your money's going to the mission. Local government and local communities are helping support that by providing services. It's not to take the services away, it's just to find a more efficient way so that military dollars don't necessarily have to go to that. So.
Thank you. What a bunch of resource we have here. It's just wonderful using the sky and Prairie to improve our quality of life and improve economic development. We are not a wasteful people in North Dakota. At this time, I would like to ask Cindy to give us a little summary of the discussion.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. It was really interesting to hear what, from the surface, I thought were going to be two dramatically different projects, and yet come to see so many really interesting points of intersection. And I think that that's a really exciting example about the power of partnerships, because when you start to think that way, you can see all kinds of opportunities that come up. So my task today is to really talk a little bit about what are some of the things that in listening to these two examples, what kinds of messages come across in terms of things to maybe avoid and things to maximize in terms of trying to do partnership projects in your own situation. So what I'm going to talk about isn't the two projects per se, but more the process. Like, how could you learn from what is being talked about here today and take it into a partnership kind of situation in your own community or around a topic or a project that you care about quite a bit. And so I'll kind of go back and forth, but I'll start with sort of my things that I heard that seem to come up and potentially be the biggest roadblocks. One of them is don't expect overnight change. I think that came across very clearly in a number of ways, listening to all the panelists talk. 2 years, right? Kind of, you guys talked about that thing started a couple of years ago. I know UAS stuff started long time ago. The two projects are at different stages, and yet you can hear these kind of similarities in terms of, you know, how do we get the first conversations down? How do we know that we're talking about the same thing? When government and private industry and people are, different entities are involved, how do you really navigate your way through these small things? And what became important out of that, it seems to me, is that at some point, you know, you have to be able to kind of refocus and think about, okay, what's our end goal? And how do we start taking small steps toward that end goal? Because it would get awfully easy, I think, to get lost in the minutia and the like day-to-day frustrations and disappointments of like one intervention not going well or one plan not going well. And so that to me seems like one of the definite traps to avoid, is not to expect change to occur right away, but to be thinking long-term. Related to that, it's also important to, you guys have already talked a lot about communication and how much that can be a challenge. And I think thinking about the fact that bureaucracies aren't always clear, but also that people who are involved in partnerships aren't going to always have the same agenda, right? People want different outcomes potentially. And so how to come up with a really important thing, I think, is a really important thing to avoid is don't ignore the minority voice. Don't ignore the competing idea. Because I think what happens there, especially in community-based projects, is people will start to feel frustrated if they are left out of a conversation that might be transformative for the entire community. Instead, what is being said? You know, what is that minority voice? What is being said that isn't part of the big plan? And how can listening to that voice maybe make the project even stronger? I think it's easy for people to feel left out of transformation and left out of change if their caution or their skepticism hasn't been taken seriously. And we can usually learn a lot from skeptics, because you know, they have a different perspective, so that's useful. The other potential trap I heard to avoid is the trap of North Dakota humility. Both panels talked in a couple of different ways about, oh, why would we want to come, not both counteracted it as well, I want to be clear about that. But I think that underlying thing is something that is really common, especially in our small communities throughout this region. Why would people want to come here? What do we have to offer that's unique? We have a lot of things to offer that are unique, and these are two great examples of ways to extrapolate that, but there are lots and lots of ways in which those unique components can be utilized in ways that move communities forward. But I do think that the North Dakota nice and the kind of humble stance can sometimes get in our own way, so that's a trap to avoid. In terms of really some great opportunities, I really like, Al said early on that chaos is opportunity. Most things that are changing present us with opportunities. What I was really intrigued by is this idea of, like, in two very different ways, both of you talked about sustainability. If we were going to think like an issue that affects everyone, regardless of whether we are comfortable with it or not comfortable with it, is the question of sustainability. Here's two different ways of looking at sustainability. We know we are coming up on a horrible water and food shortage globally. We know that. Everyone knows it. It's pretty much commonly accepted. To be able to recognize that presents us with a chance to do something different is very exciting. And it's scary. You know, change is scary. But to have that mindset that with that fear can come energy, and with that energy can come some new ideas, I think is a really important way to maximize the power of partnerships. To learn from the roadblocks and to learn from your partners about things that, yeah, you know what, this won't work, and there are really good reasons why it won't work. But this other thing might work, you know, and to really create an environment in which roadblocks can themselves be turned into alternative perspectives or alternative kind of opportunities. It sounds like a really important lesson that came from both of these panels. The other thing, or another thing that came up that I think was really important is how you connect the project or the partnership to community interests or values. You know, whether it's value of the appreciation of open prairie, or whether it is, you know, recognizing that we can, you know, you can save people's lives by cutting down on the need to climb up to the top of wind turbines. I mean, these are values and interests that people hold dear. There are lots of projects that are at some level connected to some big overarching values. And with that connection to interests and values, you're also able to show how you really are providing a service and or providing resources to the entire community or region being impacted. And then there are two more points I'd like to make. One is to be open to questions and new insights from unexpected places, which again goes to kind of listening to the voice of the skeptic, but also recognizing that somebody who might have less familiarity might bring in an idea that causes the focus to shift in a way that makes you go, oh, yeah, that's right. Like I would love to, I grew up on a farm in North Dakota. I would love to, 30 years ago, have heard what my dad had to say about like this demonstration project, right? Like it would be really, like, because he was a conservation farmer, he was what people now would consider quite old-fashioned. Like it would be really interesting to hear what that one, you know, producer would have to say, and so to be open to those kinds of new insights and realize that one voice can have that kind of impact. And then finally, the biggest, I shouldn't say the biggest, the final note that I made that came across again across both of these panels is that good ideas can get support, even if they feel like they are, you know, a little bit off the wall or a little bit out of the, you know, where did this come from out of the blue, but good ideas can get support because people care about them. That might be financial support, but even more importantly, it might be buy-in, it might be moral support, it might be community members getting excited and telling people like why this is a good idea. So when you have an idea and you have even a couple of people who are kind of willing to have a conversation about that idea, I think an important way to maximize that energy is to just make the assumption that if a couple people support it, chances are good other people will support it. And even if they don't support it, maybe they'll replace it with something even better. And I think that's the kind of energy that partnerships create that really allow things that could be small to have a really significant and important impact. So it was really a treat to get to hear about both of these projects and get a sense of the scope of how something that started out probably as a brainchild of one person really could be impacting our entire region. And so it's so those are my observations on what I heard today. So
Thank you. So I want to thank the panelists and Cindy for joining us today and giving us insight to these projects. Thank you so much. Right now, I would just like to remind you to use this time as a great networking opportunity. You can go view the art collection exhibit, the UND art collection that is on display. And there's an ice cream, social, and music at 3:30. Is that here, Jason?
Yes.
Yes, in this room. So stick around, and I hope you enjoy that and have a great afternoon.